The grand celebration pulsed with an energy that seemed to vibrate the very foundations of the National Museum of Military History. Chandeliers, heavy with crystal, blazed down on a sea of dark suits and shimmering gowns, reflecting off polished metals pinned to chests and the gleam of expensive jewelry. The air thick with the scent of aged scotch, delicate perfumes, and the faint metallic tang of patriotism, hummed with 1,000 conversations, each vying for attention. This was the annual gala for fallen heroes, an event designed to honor, to remember, and to project an image of unwavering strength and gratitude. General Thorne, a man whose presence filled a room even when he was merely sipping champagne, stood at the podium. His voice, a resonant baritone honed by decades of command, carried effortlessly across the vast hall. "Tonight," he boomed, "we gather not in sorrow, but in profound appreciation. We celebrate the courage, the sacrifice, and the enduring spirit of those who gave everything for our nation. Their legacy is etched not just in stone, but in the very fabric of our freedom." A smattering of polite applause rippled through the crowd, a well-rehearsed symphony of respect. Miles away, or so it felt from the glittering spectacle, Elias Vance shivered in the cool autumn air. The museum grounds, usually bustling with tourists, were cordoned off, leaving him and a few other less fortunate souls to huddle in the shadows of the ancillary buildings. The muffled thrum of the gala was a constant mocking reminder of the chasm between his world and theirs. He watched the limousines glide up the drive, disgorging their impeccably dressed occupants, each person radiating an aura of belonging. Elias, with his threadbare coat, tangled beard, and eyes that held the haunted depths of a forgotten sea, was a specter on the periphery. He clutched a crumpled paper bag, not for warmth, but for the meager comfort of its contents. A half-eaten sandwich someone had discarded near a dumpster. He hadn't meant to come this close. The lights, the music, the distant booming voice of General Thorne, they were a magnet pulling him against his will. A part of him, the part that still remembered crisp uniforms and the weight of command, yearned for a glimpse, just a fleeting moment of what he had lost. He knew it was folly, a self-inflicted wound, yet he couldn't tear himself away. The security guards, stern-faced and alert, patrolled the perimeter. Elias kept to the deepest shadows, a lifetime of avoiding detection honed into an instinct. Inside, the speeches continued, punctuated by carefully curated video montages of fallen soldiers, their faces young and vibrant, their futures stolen. Many guests dabbed at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs, a collective sigh of sorrow and admiration sweeping through the hall. Brigadier General Marcus Thorne, son of the esteemed General Thorne, took the stage next. Younger, sharper, with the same commanding presence, he spoke of innovation, of future challenges, and of the unwavering commitment of the armed forces to protect the nation. He was a rising star, groomed for greatness, a stark contrast to the forgotten man outside. Elias saw a gap in the security patrol. A delivery truck idling near a service entrance momentarily obscured a guard's view. A foolish impulse, a spark of defiance ignited within him. He wanted to see, just see. He slipped through the gap, moving with a practiced silence born of necessity. The service corridor was stark, smelling of disinfectant and stale cooking oil. He followed the sounds, the distant laughter and clinking glasses, until he reached a set of double doors. A narrow crack allowed him a sliver of vision into the grand ballroom. The sight was overwhelming, the sheer opulence, the vibrant life, the collective sense of purpose. It was a punch to the gut. He saw faces he recognized, not personally, but from news reports and military briefings. Politicians, defense contractors, high-ranking officers. He saw General Thorne, now seated at the head table, a picture of benevolent power. A painful memory, sharp as a shrapnel shard, pierced him. A younger Elias, clean-shaven, impeccably dressed, standing before that very man, receiving a commendation for a mission that would later unravel his life. He leaned closer, trying to make out the words being spoken now. It was General Thorne again, his voice now softer, more intimate, as he recounted a personal anecdote about a fallen comrade. Elias felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to be seen. Not acknowledged, not celebrated, but simply seen. He wanted them to know he was still here, a ghost of their past, a living testament to their selective memory. He pushed the door open just a fraction more. The squeak, though faint, cut through the ambient noise like a knife. 2 security guards, Burly men in dark suits materialized instantly. "Hey, you!" one of them barked, his voice laced with suspicion. Elias froze. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. He hadn't thought this far ahead. He hadn't considered the consequences, only the desperate pull of a forgotten past. He instinctively recoiled, trying to push the door shut, but it was too late. The guards were on him in an instant. "What do you think you're doing?" the second one demanded, grabbing him by the arm. His grip was vice-like, painfully tight. I just wanted to see," Elias stammered, his voice hoarse from disuse. He tried to pull away, but their strength was overwhelming. The smell of their cologne, sharp and expensive, filled his nostrils, a jarring contrast to his own stench of neglect. See what? Beg for money? Disrupt the event? The first guard's tone was accusatory, contemptuous. He began to drag Elias away from the door, his movements rough and unyielding. A few heads in the ballroom turned, drawn by the commotion. Whispers rippled through the nearest tables. General Thorne, mid-sentence in his anecdote, paused, his gaze narrowing as he saw the struggle. Elias's eyes met his for a fleeting second. Recognition, a flicker of something unreadable, passed across Thorne's face before it hardened into an expression of dismissive annoyance. "Get him out of here," Thorne's voice, though not raised, carried with unmistakable authority. The command was like a physical blow. The guards, emboldened, intensified their efforts. They dragged Elias past the tables, past the impeccably dressed guests, each face a mask of polite disdain or outright disgust. He stumbled, his already worn coat catching on a chair, almost pulling it over. A woman shrieked, recoiling as if he carried a contagion. A man at a nearby table sneered, "Filthy tramp! Can't they keep these people out?" The words, the looks, the physical abuse. It was a familiar script, one he had lived countless times on the streets. But here in this setting, surrounded by the very people who claimed to honor sacrifice, it felt like a fresh wound, festering and deep. His humiliation was a public spectacle, unfolding under the dazzling lights, a grotesque counterpoint to the evening's noble purpose. He tried to protest, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. What would he say? "I was once one of you. I served this country with distinction. I bear scars you cannot see, wounds inflicted by the very system you celebrate." They would laugh. They would mock. One of the guards shoved him roughly, propelling him forward. His tattered boots slipped on the polished marble floor. He fell, landing hard on his knees, the impact sending a jolt of pain up his spine. The sandwich, forgotten in his hand, flew from his grasp, scattering its meager contents across the pristine floor. A gasp rippled through the closer tables, a mixture of shock and revulsion. "On your feet, you piece of trash!" the guard snarled, yanking him up by the arm. Elias looked around, his eyes wide with a desperate plea. He saw Marcus Thorne, the younger general, watching with a detached curiosity, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Elias met his gaze, and for a moment a memory flashed. Marcus, a young captain, looking up to him, seeking his advice on a particularly complex tactical problem. The memory was fleeting, instantly replaced by the present reality. The guards continued their brutal escort, pushing him towards the main entrance. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, leaving a wide, humiliating path. He felt a strange detachment, as if watching a play unfold, starring a broken man who looked remarkably like himself. His mind drifted, a protective mechanism kicking in, transporting him to another time, another place. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of burnt cordite. The heat was relentless, baking the desert floor, shimmering off the distant dunes. Elias, then Captain Vance, wiped sweat from his brow, his uniform plastered to his skin. His team, a small elite unit, moved with precision through the desolate landscape. Their mission: retrieve highly sensitive intelligence from a downed drone before it fell into enemy hands. The stakes were immense, the margin for error non-existent. He remembered the weight of command, the lives in his hands, the adrenaline, sharp and clean, focusing his every sense, the constant pressure to make the right call, to anticipate every threat. He remembered Lieutenant Morales, a young, eager officer whose enthusiasm was contagious even in the most dire situations. Morales had been a natural leader, a man Elias had marked for rapid promotion. Clear, Morales' voice, distorted by the comms, had come through his earpiece. "Target acquired, Captain. Moving to secure." Elias had felt a surge of relief. The mission was going as planned. Too smoothly, perhaps. A nagging voice, honed by years of combat, whispered a warning. Back in the ballroom, the guards had almost reached the main doors. The incident was quickly fading into a collective shrug, a minor disruption to an otherwise perfect evening. People were already turning back to their conversations, their glasses of champagne, their carefully constructed personas. As the guards prepared to shove him out into the night, Elias saw an elderly woman, her face etched with a lifetime of experience, watching him with an expression that was neither scorn nor pity, but a profound sadness. Her eyes, faded blue, held a glint of something familiar, something that hinted at a deeper understanding. He wondered if she had seen similar spectacles before, if she recognized the brokenness beneath the dirt. Just as the door was about to swing open, a sudden piercing siren ripped through the night. Not a police siren, but something sharper, more urgent, the unmistakable wail of a military convoy. The sound grew rapidly louder, closer, echoing off the museum's grand facade. It was a jarring intrusion, a dissonant note in the polished symphony of the gala. All conversations ceased. Heads snapped towards the main entrance. The guards, momentarily startled, paused, their grip on Elias loosening almost imperceptibly. Through the massive glass doors, the source of the commotion became clear. A convoy of black armored SUVs, flanked by military police motorcycles, screeched to a halt directly in front of the museum. The lead vehicle, a hulking behemoth, bore the insignia of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Its doors flew open and out poured a cadre of grim-faced military personnel, their uniforms crisp, their movements precise. At their head was a man whose presence commanded immediate attention. He was a 4-star general, his chest ablaze with medals, his face a mask of stern determination. He carried himself with an air of absolute authority, a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. His eyes, sweeping the crowd with an almost predatory intensity, landed on Elias, still held by the bewildered security guards. The general's gaze was sharp, unwavering. He took a single, deliberate step forward, then another. The security guards, realizing they were out of their depth, instinctively let go of Elias, who stumbled backward, almost falling again. He stood there disoriented, a pariah suddenly caught in the crosshairs of something immense and unexpected. The 4-star general stopped directly in front of Elias. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the distant thrum of idling engines. Every eye was on them. "Captain Vance?" the general asked, his voice low but carrying across the hushed hall. It wasn't a question, but a statement, a confirmation. Elias, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, met a gaze that held no judgment, only a profound sense of purpose. He swallowed, his throat dry. "Yes, General," he managed, his voice a raspy whisper. The title felt strange on his tongue, a relic from a life he no longer possessed. The general nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He then turned, his gaze sweeping over the astonished faces of the gala attendees, lingering for a moment on General Thorne and his son, Marcus, who now stood utterly frozen, their faces pale. "My apologies for the intrusion," the 4-star general announced, his voice ringing with quiet power. "But Captain Vance is here under specific circumstances. He is here at the express request of the President of the United States." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The air crackled with disbelief. Elias felt a sudden dizzying wave wash over him. The President? Why? The general turned back to Elias, his eyes softening almost imperceptibly. "Captain Vance, we have been looking for you for a very long time." He extended a hand, a gesture of respect and deference that utterly transformed the scene. "General Hayes, it's an honor." Elias stared at the outstretched hand, his own trembling, calloused and stained. He remembered another hand, gloved and firm, gripping his own as he was pushed into the back of an unmarked van, the beginning of his descent. He hesitated, then slowly, tentatively, raised his hand and met General Hayes's grip. It was firm, unwavering. A connection, forged in an unspoken history, passed between them. General Hayes then turned to the museum security guards, who were now rigid with apprehension. His voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "I believe you owe Captain Vance an apology and an explanation for your aggressive hospitality." The implication was clear, the threat palpable. The guards, suddenly meek, stammered out apologies, their eyes darting nervously. Elias's mind reeled, trying to process the surreal turn of events. He was no longer the invisible, reviled tramp. He was Captain Vance, a name, a rank, a person. The weight of his hidden identity, the shame he had carried for so long, began to lift, replaced by a bewildering mix of vindication and fear. Why now? Why here? The drone, its sophisticated sensors damaged but intact, lay half buried in the sand. Morales and his team were securing the perimeter. Elias, with his technical expertise, was inside, meticulously extracting the data core. The air conditioning in the drone's interior was a small mercy, a brief respite from the desert's furnace. Suddenly the ground shook, a distant thud, then another. Artillery. Morales' frantic voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, we've got incoming. Heavy mortars bearing 305. Elias swore. They had been discovered. The carefully planned extraction was now a full-blown combat scenario. "Morales, consolidate. Provide covering fire. I'm almost done," he yelled, his fingers flying across the console. Every second critical. He could hear the shouts of his men, the sharp crack of rifle fire, the terrifying whistle of incoming shells. His heart pounded, a primal drumbeat of survival. He had to get that data out. It was too vital, too sensitive to be compromised. It held the key to an enemy network, a web of terror cells that stretched across continents. Failure was not an option. Back in the ballroom, General Hayes was speaking again, his voice now addressing the stunned assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to clarify. Captain Elias Vance was involved in a highly classified operation, Project Chimera, nearly a decade ago. An operation that, due to unforeseen and deeply unfortunate circumstances, led to his unforeseen disappearance from official records." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room, challenging anyone to question him. "The details of that mission remain classified. However, I can assure you that Captain Vance's actions during Project Chimera were nothing short of heroic. He saved countless lives, and in doing so, he sacrificed his own." The revelation hung in the air, a heavy, almost tangible weight. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mix of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. Project Chimera. The words were a brand, searing hot, pulling him back into the abyss. General Thorne, now recovered from his initial shock, stepped forward, his expression a careful blend of concern and calculated deference. "General Hayes, with all due respect, I was not aware of any such development regarding Captain Vance. He was officially declared KIA, then later, after the search was called off, presumed AWOL under highly unusual circumstances." His voice was smooth, betraying nothing. Hayes's eyes, however, were like steel. "Indeed, General Thorne. The specifics of Captain Vance's status were, shall we say, administratively complex. But tonight, that complexity ends. Captain Vance is here, and he is to be treated with the utmost respect. He is a decorated hero, unjustly forgotten." The word "unjustly" hung in the air, a silent accusation. Elias felt a surge of bitterness, a cold anger that had festered for years. Unjustly forgotten? They had orchestrated his disappearance, his erasure. They had buried him alive, then celebrated their own heroism while he starved on the streets. He looked at General Thorne, whose face was now a mask of profound regret, a performance for the crowd. He looked at Marcus, whose earlier smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered apprehension. Elias saw the lie in their eyes, the carefully constructed facade. General Hayes then gently placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, a gesture that was both protective and validating. "Captain Vance, if you're able, we need to speak with you. Immediately. There are matters of national security that require your unique expertise." The phrase national security seemed to snap the room back into a semblance of order. Even the most cynical guests understood the gravity of those words. Elias, however, felt a profound weariness. He wanted to refuse, to vanish back into the shadows, to reject the system that had chewed him up and spat him out. But the weight of duty, a deeply ingrained instinct, still lingered. I understand, General," Elias managed, his voice still hoarse, but gaining a sliver of its old strength. General Hayes nodded, then turned to his military police detail. "Secure the area. No one in, no one out, until Captain Vance is safely escorted." As the military police began to cordon off the entrance, their presence a stark contrast to the earlier complacent museum security, Elias felt a strange sense of unreality. The chandeliers still glittered, the champagne still flowed, but the celebratory atmosphere had been shattered, replaced by an electric tension. He looked at the scattered remnants of his sandwich on the floor, a stark symbol of his recent past. A young waiter, his face pale, knelt to clean it up. Elias felt a pang of something akin to pity for the boy, caught in this sudden maelstrom. He turned his gaze back to General Hayes. "General, why now? After all this time?" Hayes's expression was grave. "A new threat has emerged, Captain. One that bears the hallmarks of Project Chimera. We need your insight. We need your memory. You are the only one with the full picture." The words struck Elias with the force of a physical blow. A new threat, connected to Chimera? The mission that had cost him everything. The mission that had broken him. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He was being pulled back, against his will, into the very darkness he had tried so desperately to escape. The drone's console sparked. The data core was almost fully extracted. "Almost there!" Elias yelled into the comms. Outside, the battle raged. The cries of his men, the roar of enemy vehicles, the incessant pounding of mortar fire. It was a symphony of chaos. "Captain, fall back." Morales' voice was strained, panicked. "They're overwhelming us. We need to pull out." "Negative, Morales. This data is critical. Hold your position," Elias commanded, his voice unwavering despite the terror clawing at his throat. He saw the red light on the console flash, indicating partial corruption. He had to complete the download. It was the only way to save the network. A sudden deafening explosion rocked the drone. The interior lights flickered, then died. Darkness engulfed him, thick and suffocating. He felt a searing pain in his arm, then another in his leg. The air filled with dust and the metallic scent of his own blood. He heard screams, then silence, a terrifying, absolute silence. He fumbled for his comms, his fingers numb. "Morales? Status report. Morales?" Only static answered. He was alone, trapped. The data core, still partially extracted, pulsed with a weak, desperate light. As the memory faded, Elias felt a renewed surge of fear. He had barely survived that mission. What new horrors awaited him? What new sacrifices would be demanded? He was no longer the fit, sharp Captain Vance. He was a broken man, ravaged by years on the streets, haunted by ghosts. General Hayes, sensing his hesitation, spoke again, his voice softer, almost paternal. "Captain, I understand your reservations. We have much to atone for. But this isn't just about the past. It's about the future, about preventing another chimera from happening. You are our last hope." The weight of those words, last hope, settled heavily on Elias's shoulders. He looked around the ballroom, at the faces of the powerful, the privileged, who had so readily dismissed him, only to now look at him with a mixture of awe and fear. He saw the hypocrisy, the self-interest, the convenient amnesia. But he also saw the genuine concern in General Hayes's eyes, a man who seemed to genuinely understand the gravity of the situation. And beneath the layers of bitterness and despair, a flicker of something still remained within Elias, a sense of duty, a warrior's instinct to protect, even when he himself felt utterly unprotected. He took a deep breath, the scent of expensive perfume and polished wood momentarily overridden by the faint, earthy smell of his own neglect. He straightened his shoulders, a subtle movement, but one that spoke volumes. The weariness remained etched deep in his bones, but something else had awakened, a spark, a faint flickering ember that refused to be extinguished. "All right, General," Elias said, his voice stronger now, clear despite the rasp. "Tell me what you need." The words hung in the air, a silent vow. The grand celebration, meant to honor heroes, had instead unveiled one, dragged from the depths of obscurity and humiliation. The party was over. The real mission had just begun. General Hayes nodded, a look of profound relief washing over his face. He gestured towards the main entrance where the military convoy waited, a silent, imposing presence. The path was clear now, not of contempt but of respect. Elias Vance, the forgotten hero, was finally going home. But what kind of home, and what kind of battle remained to be seen? He took one last look at the faces of the powerful, the ones who had dismissed him, and walked towards the waiting vehicles, his ragged coat flapping slightly in the cool night air. The irony was not lost on him. He was being escorted by a full military convoy, not as a prisoner, but as a man whose very presence commanded attention and respect. The gala, with all its pomp and circumstance, had been nothing more than a prelude to his re-entry into a world he thought he had left behind forever. The taste of vindication was bitter, but underneath it, a sense of grim determination began to take root. He was back, and they would remember him. Elias's arrival. The opulent ballroom, moments ago a symphony of hushed conversations and clinking glasses, now thrummed with a different kind of energy. Every eye, from the socialites in their shimmering gowns to the stern-faced officers, was fixed on Elias Vance. He stood, a stark silhouette against the glittering backdrop, his tattered coat a defiant challenge to the pristine uniform surrounding him. The rough ejection, the jeers, the palpable disgust, it all seemed to recede into a distant hum as General Hayes's words echoed through the sudden silence. Captain Vance, the name, resurrected from a forgotten past, hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Elias, still half sprawled on the polished marble, felt a strange detachment. The cold floor against his cheek, the lingering ache from the guard's knee in his back, these were familiar sensations. What was unfamiliar was the sudden shift in the atmosphere, the collective gas that rippled through the onlookers. He slowly pushed himself up, his movements stiff, each muscle protesting. His eyes, once dulled by years of neglect, now held a glint of something sharper, something that had been buried deep. General Hayes, a man whose presence usually commanded immediate attention, now radiated an almost frantic urgency. He strode forward, his perfectly tailored uniform a stark contrast to Elias's disheveled appearance. "Captain Vance," he repeated, his voice lower now, imbued with a gravity that silenced even the most persistent whispers. He extended a hand, not in a gesture of aid, but of almost reverent respect. Elias stared at the outstretched hand, then slowly, deliberately, met the general's gaze. There was recognition there, a flicker of something ancient in Hayes's eyes. A memory, fleeting and indistinct, brushed against Elias's mind. A younger Hayes, perhaps, in a different uniform, a different time. He ignored the hand, opting instead to brush the dust from his own tattered trousers, a small act of defiance. General Thorne, his face a mask of carefully controlled bewilderment, finally found his voice. "Hayes, what in God's name are you talking about? This man, he's a vagrant. My security detail just removed him." His voice, usually booming, was laced with an uncharacteristic uncertainty. Marcus Thorne, who had been watching with a mixture of shock and dawning horror, took a hesitant step forward. He remembered the man, yes, but not this man, not the hero General Hayes was describing. The Elias Vance he knew was a vibrant, laughing presence, a force of nature. This emaciated figure with hollowed eyes and a haunted air was a ghost. Hayes turned sharply to Thorne, his eyes blazing with an intensity that brooked no argument. "General Thorne, with all due respect, your security detail just committed a grave injustice. This vagrant is Captain Elias Vance, a hero of this nation, decorated with the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, and countless commendations for his service in Project Chimera. He was presumed KIA in the field, officially erased from all records under classified orders, for reasons I am still attempting to fully comprehend." His voice dropped, heavy with a weight that seemed to press down on the entire room. "And he is now, General, our only hope." The murmurs returned, louder now, a tidal wave of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Project Chimera. The words were whispered, a phantom echo of a mission so secret, so shrouded in mystery that few even knew of its existence. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Chimera. The name itself was a brand burned into his memory. A sudden flash of memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through his detachment. The dust, hot and gritty, stinging his eyes. The acrid smell of burning fuel and something else, something metallic and organic. Sarah's face, pale and strained, her comms crackling with static. "Elias, get out of there. It's compromised." The memory receded as quickly as it came, leaving behind a dull ache in his chest. General Thorne, his face paling, stammered, "Presumed KIA? Erased? Hayes, this is unbelievable. What are you saying?" "I'm saying, General, that Captain Vance was sacrificed, forgotten, and left to rot after a mission that saved this nation from a threat it never even knew existed," Hayes declared, his voice ringing with conviction. He turned back to Elias, his expression softening, though the urgency remained. "Captain, I know this is a shock. I know you have every right to despise us, to walk away, but the threat has resurfaced. The very thing you fought to contain, the reason for Project Chimera's existence, is back, and it's worse than before." Elias finally spoke, his voice a low, raspy growl, unctuous for such formal pronouncements. "Worse?" He looked around the room at the faces now filled with a mixture of awe and fear. He saw the shift in their eyes, the sudden respect replacing the contempt. It was a familiar pattern, one he had seen played out in different contexts, different lives. Hayes nodded grimly. "Significantly. The breaches are more frequent, the manifestations more aggressive. We've lost personnel, Captain, good people, and our current protocols, our best minds, are powerless. You were the only one who truly understood its nature, the only one who ever managed to push it back." He paused, then added, his voice tinged with a desperate plea, "We need your help, Captain. The world needs your help." The weight of those words, "the world needs your help," settled on Elias's shoulders, a familiar burden. He had carried it before in the blistering heat of forgotten deserts, in the chilling silence of covert facilities. He had carried it, and it had broken him. He looked at Marcus, who was now standing closer, his face etched with a myriad of emotions: confusion, regret, a dawning understanding. Their eyes met, and in that brief connection a floodgate of shared history threatened to burst. Marcus saw the ghost of the man he once admired, the one who had taught him how to throw a spiral, how to stand up for himself. Elias saw a younger, more innocent version of Marcus, before the world had carved its lines of cynicism onto his face. "Marcus," Elias said, his voice barely a whisper, a question more than a statement. Marcus flinched as if struck. "Elias," he replied, his voice thick with unvoiced apologies. He took another step, closing the distance between them. I didn't know." The words felt hollow even to him. How could he not have known? How could he have seen this man, this shadow of a hero, and not recognized him? The shame burned in his gut. Before Marcus could say anything further, General Hayes interjected, his voice firm, drawing attention back to the immediate crisis. "Captain Vance, we have a secure transport waiting. We need to brief you immediately. Every second counts." Elias hesitated. The warmth of the ballroom, the soft glow of the chandeliers, the clinking of ice in forgotten glasses, it all felt unreal, a fragile illusion. The real world, the one he had inhabited for so long, was cold, unforgiving, and filled with the echoes of his past. But the words, "The threat has resurfaced," had struck a chord deep within him, a forgotten sense of duty. He looked at Hayes, then at Thorne, whose face was now a study in abject humiliation. He saw the fear in Thorne's eyes, the fear not just of a public scandal, but of a looming unknown danger. And then he looked at Marcus, whose gaze was fixed on him, a silent plea in his eyes. A sigh escaped Elias, a weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Fine," he rasped, the single word, a reluctant acceptance. "But first, I need a coffee, black, and a shower, a long, hot shower." The requests, simple and human, seemed to ground the surreal situation, pulling it back from the brink of pure fantasy. Hayes, visibly relieved, immediately barked orders to a nearby aide. "Get Captain Vance whatever he needs. Now!" The aide, a young lieutenant, snapped to attention and practically sprinted from the ballroom. As Elias, now escorted by General Hayes and a phalanx of newly respectful officers, began to move towards the exit, the crowd parted for him. No longer an unwanted intruder, he was a figure of intrigue, a resurrected legend. He felt the eyes on him, the whispers trailing in his wake, but he kept his gaze straight ahead, a hardened shell against the sudden surge of attention. He passed by the very guards who had moments ago manhandled him. Their faces were ashen, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning guilt. One of them, a burly man with a thick neck, stammered, "Sir, Captain, I am so sorry." Elias stopped, his head slowly turning. He looked at the guard, his eyes piercing. "You were just doing your job," he said, his voice devoid of anger or even forgiveness, just a flat statement of fact. "Just make sure next time you know who you're kicking out." He continued walking, leaving the guard to wrestle with the full implications of his actions. As they exited the grand hall, the cool night air hit Elias, a refreshing shock after the stifling warmth of the ballroom. Outside, a sleek black-armored SUV idled, its engine a low purr. A small convoy of other vehicles waited, their headlights cutting through the darkness. This was not just a simple transport, it was a military operation, mobilized with a speed and precision that spoke volumes about the urgency of the situation. Before Elias could step into the SUV, Marcus, having pushed through the remaining crowd, reached him. "Elias, wait," he pleaded, his hand reaching out, then pulling back, unsure if he had the right to touch him. We need to talk about everything. Elias turned, his gaze softening slightly. Marcus, he said, his voice a little clearer now, carrying a hint of the old warmth. There'll be time, but right now, something far more important is at stake. He glanced at Hayes, then back at Marcus. The world's still turning, Marcus, and sometimes it needs a little push to keep it going in the right direction. He offered Marcus a ghost of a smile, a fleeting glimpse of the man he once was, then climbed into the SUV. Hayes followed, and the door closed with a solid thud, severing Elias from the glittering world he had briefly re-entered. The interior of the SUV was a stark contrast to the opulent ballroom. It was functional, utilitarian, but surprisingly comfortable. The air was cool, smelling faintly of leather and something metallic, like a new weapon. As the convoy smoothly pulled away from the gala, leaving the shimmering lights and astonished faces behind, Elias felt a strange sense of resignation settle over him. He was back. Back in the game. Back in the darkness he had tried so desperately to escape. A silver tray was offered to him, bearing a steaming mug of black coffee and a small plate of gourmet sandwiches. He took the coffee, the warmth seeping into his chilled hands, and took a long, deep gulp. The bitterness was a welcome shock to his system. He hadn't realized how parched he was. General Hayes, seated opposite him, watched him with a mixture of concern and relief. Captain, I know this is a whirlwind. Forgive the abruptness, but we truly don't have the luxury of time. Elias grunted, taking another sip of coffee. Time. Always running out, isn't it? Indeed, Hayes replied, his face grim. Let's start with what you remember about Project Chimera. The core objectives, the nature of the entity, the containment protocols. Elias closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the plush headrest. The words, the names, the protocols, they were all there, buried under layers of trauma and neglect, but still present, etched into the very fabric of his being. A different kind of memory surfaced then, not a flashback, but a feeling. The feeling of the desert sun on his skin, the taste of sand in his mouth, the camaraderie of his team. Before Chimera, before the mission that had stolen his identity and nearly his sanity. He saw himself, younger, stronger, laughing with Sarah, his second in command, their banter easy and familiar. He saw Miller, the quiet tech genius, always tinkering with some new gadget. He saw Chen, the sharpshooter, his eyes always scanning the horizon. They were a family, forged in the crucible of countless missions, united by a shared purpose and an unbreakable bond. He opened his eyes, the memory a bittersweet ache in his chest. Chimera, he began, his voice gaining strength with each word. It wasn't just a project. It was a containment operation for an interdimensional anomaly. Hayes nodded, his expression unreadable. And that anomaly, Captain, has found a way back. Elias looked out of the window at the blur of city lights passing by. The world was still there, oblivious, asleep, and somewhere, in the shadows, something was stirring, something he knew intimately, something he had fought, and something that had almost consumed him. He was Elias Vance, captain, veteran, and now, once again, the world's reluctant savior. The long, hot shower would have to wait. The fight was back on. The SUV sped through the night, a silent, armored beast cutting through the sleeping city. Elias, now stripped of his tattered coat and wrapped in a fresh, clean uniform, courtesy of an emergency stop at a military depot, felt a strange sensation. The fabric was crisp, the fit surprisingly good, a stark contrast to the threadbare clothes he'd worn for years. It was a uniform he had once worn with pride, then with a heavy burden, and finally had been stripped of entirely. Now it felt like a costume, a role he was being forced to play again. General Hayes, observing Elias's quiet contemplation, broke the silence. "The facility is not far now, Captain. It's a secure underground installation, completely off-grid. We've been upgrading its defenses since the first signs of the breaches." Elias merely grunted, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery. He wasn't looking at the buildings or the streetlights. He was looking through them, into a past that was rapidly becoming his present. "What about the breaches?" Elias finally asked, his voice low. "Where are they happening? What's the common denominator?" Hayes sighed, a heavy sound. "That's the perplexing part, Captain. They're seemingly random. Or at least we haven't been able to identify a pattern. Small, localized events at first, then escalating. Energy fluctuations, localized gravity shifts, distortions in space-time, and then the manifestations." "How aggressive," Elias pressed, his eyes narrowing. "Increasingly so," Hayes admitted. "The first few were almost passive, like echoes, but the recent ones, they've been violent. We've lost 3 teams in the last month alone. Standard weaponry, even advanced prototypes, seems to have little effect." Elias nodded slowly. "That sounds about right. Standard methods won't work. You can't fight something that exists in multiple dimensions with a single-dimension solution." He paused, then looked at Hayes. "You said manifestations. Are we talking about what I think we're talking about?" Hayes's face tightened. "Yes, Captain. We're seeing echoes of the entity, fragmented forms, but with increasing coherence and power. They're learning, adapting, and they're looking for something." "Or someone," Elias murmured, a chill snaking down his spine. He remembered the feeling, the pervasive, intelligent presence of the entity, its insidious reach. It wasn't just a mindless force. It was something ancient, something with a will. The convoy finally pulled off the main road, onto a secluded, unmarked path. The trees grew thicker here, their branches arching overhead, creating a tunnel of darkness. Ahead, a heavily fortified gate, bristling with cameras and armed guards, loomed into view. It slid open with a low hum, revealing a discreet entrance carved into the side of a hill. Inside, the air grew colder, the scent of concrete and ozone replacing the fresh night air. The SUV descended into the earth through a series of blast doors and security checkpoints, each one more formidable than the last. This was a deep-level facility, designed to withstand the unthinkable. They finally arrived in a cavernous underground hangar, brightly lit and humming with activity. Technicians in sterile jumpsuits moved purposefully around various equipment, their faces serious. A large circular platform dominated the center of the hangar, surrounded by an array of flickering screens and complex machinery. This was clearly the heart of their operation, the front line against the unseen threat. As Elias stepped out of the SUV, a wave of familiar sensations washed over him. The low thump of the generators, the distant clang of metal, the controlled chaos of a military research facility. It was a world he had once known intimately, a world he had thought he'd left behind forever. A woman in a crisp lab coat, her hair pulled back severely, approached them, her eyes, sharp and intelligent, immediately fixed on Elias. "General Hayes, I presume this is Captain Vance?" Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension in her posture. "Dr. Aris," Hayes introduced. "This is Captain Elias Vance. Captain, Dr. Aris is our lead theoretical physicist and head of the research division here. She's been instrumental in analyzing the breaches." Dr. Aris offered Elias a curt nod, her gaze assessing him with an almost clinical intensity. "Captain Vance, it's an honor and a great relief. Your work, or what little we managed to salvage of it, has been our guiding light." Elias simply nodded in return. He wasn't interested in pleasantries. "What have you got for me, Doctor?" Dr. Aris gestured toward the central platform. "If you'll follow me. We've been tracking a new breach. It's active now, fluctuating." As they walked, Elias took in the details of the facility. Advanced, certainly, but he noticed subtle differences, upgrades, and modifications to the original Project Chimera containment protocols. Some looked promising, others less so. He could already see potential vulnerabilities, gaps in their understanding. They reached a control room overlooking the central platform, a room filled with blinking lights and a cacophony of data readouts. Large holographic displays projected intricate patterns of energy, swirling vortexes of color, and complex mathematical equations. It was a symphony of chaos, rendered in digital form. "This," Dr. Aris began, gesturing to a particularly violent energy signature on one of the main screens, "is the current breach. Location: Sector 7, a decommissioned research outpost in the Arctic. It's been active for the past 72 hours, slowly expanding." Elias leaned closer to the screen, his eyes scanning the data with a practiced intensity. He recognized the signature, a familiar echo of the entity's presence. "Arctic," he mused. "That's new. Usually it prefers areas with high electromagnetic interference or high emotional density." Dr. Aris nodded. "Precisely. That's why the Arctic location is so unusual. There's nothing there. No population centers, no significant power grids." "Or," Elias countered, his voice thoughtful, "it's a distraction, a probing action. Or it's looking for something specific, something hidden in the ice." He remembered the early theories, the speculation about the entity's origins, its connection to ancient, forgotten places. "We've deployed a small team to investigate," Kaz interjected, his voice grim. "We haven't had contact in 6 hours." Elias turned, his gaze hardening. "You sent a team into an active breach without understanding what you're up against?" "General, with all due respect, that was a catastrophic error." Hayes winced. "We were desperate, Captain. Running out of options. We believed the new containment shields would offer some protection." Elias scoffed. "Containment shields are like trying to stop a tidal wave with a picket fence when dealing with this thing. It doesn't just exist in this dimension. It exists between them. You can't build a physical wall against something that can simply phase through it." "Doctor?" Eris stepped forward, her expression earnest. "Captain, we've made significant advancements in interdimensional physics since Project Chimera. We've developed a new theory of localized temporal displacement fields, which could potentially disrupt its cohesion." Elias turned to her, a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Temporal displacement? Explain." Dr. Aris launched into a rapid-fire explanation, her voice brimming with scientific passion. "We believe the entity, or rather its manifestations, are a projection across multiple temporal planes. By inducing a localized rapid fluctuation in the temporal fabric, we might be able to desynchronize its projections, effectively severing its connection to our dimension." Elias listened intently, his mind already racing, dissecting her theories, looking for flaws, for potential applications. It was a new approach, certainly, but it resonated with some of his own nascent theories from years ago. "And the energy required for this temporal displacement field?" Dr. Aris gestured to the central platform. "That's where Project Kronos comes in. It's a multispectral energy resonator, capable of generating the necessary frequencies. It's still experimental, but in theory, it could work." Elias walked over to a console, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard, pulling up old data, cross-referencing it with the new breach readings. He saw the patterns, the familiar signatures, but also the subtle shifts. the indications that the entity had indeed evolved. "It's stronger," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "and smarter. It's not just projecting itself, it's attempting to anchor itself, to permanently establish a foothold in our reality." Hayes and Eris exchanged a worried glance. "Anchor itself?" Hayes asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What would that mean for us?" Elias turned to them, his eyes grim. "It would mean the end. Not a sudden, cataclysmic end, but a slow, insidious corruption. Our reality would be twisted, warped, until it became unrecognizable, until it became its reality." The weight of his words hung in the air, a chilling prophecy. The urgency in the room escalated, the quiet hum of machinery suddenly feeling like a ticking clock. "So, Project Kronos," Elias continued, his mind already shifting into operational mode. "How quickly can it be deployed, and what are the risks?" Dr. Aris hesitated. "Deployment is the primary challenge. It's massive, requires a dedicated power source, and is highly sensitive. And the risks? Well, at this scale, a miscalibration could lead to unforeseen temporal distortions. Or worse." "Worse?" Elias prompted, a sardonic edge to his voice. He had seen worse firsthand. "It could destabilize the fabric of space-time itself," Dr. Aris admitted, her voice low, "creating localized singularities or tearing a permanent rift between dimensions." Elias absorbed the information, his face a mask of detached concentration. The stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just about containment anymore. It was about preventing a full-scale interdimensional invasion. "All right," he said, pushing away from the console. "Here's what we're going to do. Dr. Aris, I need every piece of data you have on Project Kronos. Every schematic, every theoretical calculation, every failure report. General Hayes, I need a detailed briefing on the Arctic team, their last known position, their equipment, their physical and psychological profiles, and I need a secure line to Marcus Thorne." Hayes looked surprised. "Marcus? What for?" "He's got a good mind for logistics, and he knows how to cut through red tape," Elias explained. "A ghost of a memory of Marcus efficiently handling a complex supply chain during a training exercise. More importantly, he knows me. He knows how I operate. I'll need someone I can trust on the outside." Hayes nodded, already barking orders into a comms unit. Dr. Aris, her earlier apprehension replaced by a fierce determination, was already pulling up data on her console. The gears of a massive clandestine operation were turning, powered by the sudden, brutal reintroduction of its long-lost architect. Elias walked over to a large tactical map projected onto the wall, showing the Arctic breach location. He remembered the unforgiving landscape, the biting cold, the isolation. It was a fitting stage for a battle against an entity that thrived on despair and emptiness. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. The dull ache in his bones, the weariness in his spirit, nah. It all receded, replaced by a laser-like focus. He was back in his element, a warrior recalled from forced retirement, facing a threat only he truly understood. The world had forgotten him, discarded him, but now it needed him. And Elias Vance, captain, hero, and forgotten man, was ready to answer the call. He had a war to finish,